Picture this. You're scrolling through your feed at 2 a.m., questioning every life choice you've ever made, when suddenly you stumble upon the most profound question humanity has never asked. What if the wrong species have been running this planet all along? What if I told you there's a parallel universe where the dominant species isn't frantically building rockets to escape Earth, but instead perfecting the art of floating peacefully in rivers? Where the biggest philosophical debate isn't about artificial intelligence, but about whether it's better to nap in shallow water or on warm grass. Welcome to Earth 2, where capybaras took the evolutionary wheel and steered our planet toward the most unexpectedly zen outcome in cosmic history. And before you roll your eyes thinking this is just another "what if animals could talk" fantasy, stick around, because this story might just crack open everything you thought you knew about success, happiness, and what it really means to be civilized. See, we humans have spent millennia convinced that progress means faster, higher, louder. We've built skyscrapers that pierce clouds, invented machines that think faster than we do, and created social networks that somehow make us feel more isolated than ever. Meanwhile, in this alternate reality, our capybara overlords discovered something we completely missed: the revolutionary power of just chilling out. But here's where it gets interesting. And trust me, your overthinking brain is about to get the philosophical workout it's been craving. What if the very traits we consider primitive or simple are actually the most advanced responses to existence? What if the capybara's legendary calmness isn't laziness, but the highest form of emotional intelligence? What if their ability to get along with literally every other species isn't naivety, but the ultimate expression of wisdom? And before you dismiss this as hippie nonsense, consider this. While we're having panic attacks about productivity and burning out from the pressure to optimize every second of our lives, capybaras have mastered something we're desperately trying to buy for meditation apps and wellness retreats. They've figured out how to just be. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a stressed capybara? When did you hear about capybara road rage, capybara social media drama, or capybara existential dread about their carbon footprint? They're basically living the life every self-help book promises, but never quite delivers. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into a world where the biggest social movement isn't about fighting for rights, but about perfecting the communal float. Where conflict resolution doesn't involve lawyers or therapy, but simply lying down until the problem gets bored and wanders away. Where the ultimate life hack isn't a productivity app, but understanding that sometimes the most profound thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. Ready to have your entire worldview gently disrupted by the most chill species on the planet? It all started, according to the Capybara Chronicles. Yes, they kept records, just on lily pads instead of paper, around 65 million years ago. While our timeline's mammals were celebrating the departure of dinosaurs by immediately getting into an evolutionary arms race, the capybara ancestors of Earth, too, had a different reaction entirely. Well, that was intense. Let's not do that again. Instead of developing sharp claws, powerful jaws, or complex hunting strategies, they doubled down on their secret weapon: radical acceptance. While other species were busy evolving bigger brains to solve problems, capybaras evolved bigger hearts to dissolve them. It was the most accidentally brilliant evolutionary strategy in the history of the universe. Dr. Marina Tranquilla, the leading capybara philosopher, yes, they have those, explains it in her seminal work, The Tao of Floating. Why fight the current when you can become one with it? Why solve problems when you can outlast them? We discovered that the universe has a funny way of working things out if you just give it enough time and stop interfering. But here's where it gets scientifically fascinating. While human civilization developed through competition, us versus them, survival of the fittest, conquest of nature, capybara society evolved through what scientists call collaborative indifference. They didn't compete with other species. They just existed so peacefully that everyone else forgot why they were fighting in the first place. Picture the Pleistocene epoch, but instead of saber-toothed cats terrorizing everything in sight, you've got saber-toothed cats lounging next to giant capybaras by the river, occasionally grooming each other's fur. Predator and prey relationships didn't disappear. They just became really, really chill about it. Listen, a wise capybara elder supposedly told a confused jaguar, You can eat me if you want, but have you considered that I'm like 60% water and mostly flavorless? Plus, if you eat me, who's going to keep this perfect sunny spot by the river warm for you? Think it through, friend. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. Jaguars started developing a taste for fruit. Caimans discovered meditation. Piranhas formed support groups about their anger issues. The entire Amazon ecosystem basically became one giant therapy session facilitated by incredibly patient, water-loving rodents. The capybaras didn't conquer through force. They conquered through osmosis. Their calm was so profound, so unshakable, that it literally changed the atmospheric pressure around them. Other animals couldn't help but relax. It was like the entire planet took a collective deep breath and realized they'd been holding it for millions of years. But the real genius of capybara civilization wasn't their peaceful nature. It was their transportation system. While humans were inventing wheels and then immediately using them for war chariots, capybaras looked at rivers and thought, these are nature's highways, and they come with built-in massage therapy. The Great Float Network, as it came to be known, connected every major body of water on the planet. Need to get somewhere? Just slip into the nearest river and join the flow. No schedules, no traffic jams, no road rage. Just gentle floating punctuated by occasional philosophical discussions about cloud shapes. Time became irrelevant, explains Professor Aquatico, a capybara historian. When you're not fighting the current, you arrive exactly when you need to. Every journey became a meditation. Every commute became a vacation. We accidentally solved the work-life balance problem by making them the same thing. And here's where your human brain might start short-circuiting. They built an entire civilization without building anything. No cities, no roads, no monuments to their greatness. They just existed so harmoniously that the planet itself became their infrastructure. Rivers were their highways, marshes were their meeting spaces, and the grass was their everything: bedroom, office, conference room, and meditation hall all rolled into one. The first capybara universities were just circles of particularly wise elders floating in lazy rivers, teaching through example rather than explanation. The curriculum was simple: advanced floating, intermediate chill, and philosophy of grass, with graduate courses in conflict resolution through strategic ignoring. But as beautiful as this all sounds, even paradise has its challenges. How do you govern a species that considers making decisions to be slightly aggressive? Now here's where things get really trippy. How do you run a civilization when your core philosophy is whatever happens, happens? The capybara governmental system, if you can even call it that, would make political scientists weep with confusion and jealousy. They called it fluid democracy, and it worked like this. Instead of electing leaders, they simply followed whoever happened to be floating in front at any given moment. No campaigns, no promises, no corruption, just a gentle rotation of accidental leadership based entirely on current patterns and who felt like being slightly more decisive that day. The closest thing they had to a president was called the chief floater, a position that changed every few hours depending on who was naturally drifting toward the front of the group. It was democracy by physics rather than politics. The chief floater's main responsibility was to occasionally point in a general direction and say things like, "That way looks pleasant," or "Those clouds seem promising." But here's the beautiful absurdity of it all. It actually worked better than anything we've ever tried. Without the ego-driven need to be in charge, without the power struggles and territorial disputes, decisions just flowed naturally. Like water finding the path of least resistance, solutions emerged organically from the collective calm. Conflict resolution, explains Elder Serenidad, was remarkably simple. When two capybaras disagreed about something, they would float in opposite directions until they couldn't remember what they were arguing about. Usually took about 7 minutes. Sometimes we'd reconvene and realize the problem had solved itself, or that it wasn't actually a problem in the first place. The legal system was equally revolutionary. Instead of courts and judges, they had grass circles, informal gatherings where disputes were resolved through what they called therapeutic silence. Everyone involved would lie down in the sun and just exist until the disagreement naturally dissolved into irrelevance. Most conflicts, notes Professor Postol, a leading expert in capybara jurisprudence, turned out to be misunderstandings caused by thinking too much. Once everyone stopped overthinking, solutions became obvious, or the problem would wander off to bother someone else. Either way, problem solved. The most serious crime in capybara society was aggressive floating, deliberately swimming faster than the natural current flow. The punishment was having to float completely still for an entire afternoon, while other capybaras gently explained why rushing was counterproductive. Repeat offenders were required to take remedial courses in advanced chill until they learned to let the river do the work. But the real genius of their system revealed itself during what historians call the Great Disagreement of the Third Monsoon. Two different capybara communities had different opinions about whether mornings or evenings were better for communal floating. In human terms, this would have sparked wars, built walls, created centuries of conflict. In capybara terms, both communities continued floating at their preferred times, occasionally waved at each other when their schedules overlapped, and eventually someone suggested floating at noon as a compromise. The conflict lasted approximately one season and ended with an inter-community floating festival that became an annual tradition. Their economic system was equally baffling to conventional thinking. They operated on what economists would later term the gift economy of enough. Since everyone's basic needs, water, grass, sunshine, and good vibes, were freely available and infinitely renewable, the concept of scarcity never developed. Instead of accumulating wealth, capybaras accumulated experiences. Instead of competing for resources, they shared whatever was abundant. Instead of working to buy things, they worked together to maintain the natural systems that provided everything they needed for free. Why would anyone hoard grass? Asks economic philosopher Dr. Abundante. There's literally grass everywhere. Why would anyone control access to water? The rain keeps making more. The whole concept of artificial scarcity seemed not just unnecessary, but actively insane. The result was a society with zero homeless capybaras, zero hungry capybaras, and zero capybaras working jobs they hated to buy things they didn't need to impress other capybaras they didn't like. It was socialism by accident, implemented by creatures too chill to realize they were being revolutionary. But perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of capybara governance was their approach to progress and innovation. While human civilizations measured advancement through technological breakthroughs and architectural achievements, capybaras measured progress through increasing levels of collective calm. The height of capybara civilization wasn't marked by landing on the moon or inventing the internet. It was the day they achieved perfect float synchronization across all 7 continents simultaneously. Millions of capybaras floating in perfect harmony with natural water currents, creating a kind of planetary meditation that supposedly influenced weather patterns and made flowers bloom more vibrantly. We didn't need to conquer space, reflects astronomer-philosopher Captain Cosmos, because we realized we were already floating through it on this beautiful blue spaceship called Earth. Why build rockets when the planet itself is already traveling through the universe at thousands of miles per hour? We just learned to enjoy the ride. But all this floating and philosophical pondering raises the obvious question. What happened to all the other species in this Zen paradise? How did predator-prey relationships survive in a world where everyone was too chill to eat each other? Here's where the capybara story gets really wild, and where your human brain might need to take a little break to process the sheer impossibility of what I'm about to tell you. Because in Earth, too, the capybaras didn't just create a peaceful society for themselves. They accidentally converted the entire animal kingdom to their philosophy of radical chill. It started with what historians call the Great Mellowing, a gradual process where predator species began questioning the whole eat or be eaten lifestyle. Picture a jaguar approaching a capybara family for what should have been lunch, only to find them so completely relaxed that the jaguar started wondering if maybe he was the one doing life wrong. It was the strangest thing, recalls elder jaguar Zen. Yes, that's his real name. Jaguar started adopting Zen names around the second age of chill. I'd approach them with all my predatory instincts activated, and they'd just look at me with these completely peaceful eyes and be like, "Oh hey, want to join our float? The water's perfect today." How do you maintain your killer instinct when your prey is inviting you to a spa day? The transformation wasn't instant. It took several generations of gradually confused predators who kept finding their hunting expeditions turning into group therapy sessions. Turns out, it's really hard to eat something that's genuinely happy to see you and immediately assumes you're there to be friends. Dr. Evolution, a cross-species anthropologist, they invented that field, documented the process. The capybaras possessed what we now call weaponized wholesomeness. They were so authentically kind, so genuinely accepting, that aggressive behavior literally couldn't sustain itself in their presence. It was like trying to stay angry while getting a massage. Technically possible, but why would you want to? But here's the fascinating part. The predators didn't just stop hunting capybaras. They started adopting capybara values across the board. Jaguars began offering meditation services to stressed forest animals. Caimans became conflict resolution specialists, using their natural patience and stillness to help other species work through their problems. Hawks started aerial tour guide services, showing other animals the most beautiful floating spots from above. The ecosystem transformed into something that would make ecology textbooks spontaneously combust with confusion. Food chains became food circles of support. Competition became collaboration. Survival of the fittest became survival of the most chill. We realized, explains Professor Harmony, a reformed piranha who now runs underwater breathing workshops, that the nature red in tooth and claw thing was just one way of doing life, not the way. Once we tried the capybara approach, where everyone just focuses on being as peaceful and helpful as possible, everything got so much easier. And honestly, way more fun. The transportation revolution was equally mind-blowing. Remember how capybaras used rivers as highways? Well, other species started adapting this system to their own needs. Birds created thermal highways, organized air current routes that connected continents, allowing for intercontinental migration without any of the exhausting wing flapping. Burrowing animals developed the underground float network, a system of tunnels filled with perfectly temperature-controlled water that functioned like a subway system for moles, prairie dogs, and reformed earthworms. But the most beautiful innovation was the interspecies express, mixed group floating, where capybaras, turtles, otters, reformed caimans, meditating birds, and various other aquatic adjacent creatures would all float together in massive, peaceful convoys that resembled floating cities of Zen. Imagine, says Transportation Coordinator Captain Current, hundreds of different species, all floating together at the exact speed of contentment, sharing stories, philosophy, and occasionally grooming each other's hard-to-reach spots. It was like a moving meditation retreat that also functioned as public transportation. We accidentally solved both traffic congestion and social isolation simultaneously. The urban planning revolution was equally impressive, mainly because there wasn't any urban planning. Instead of building cities, they created convergence zones, natural areas where multiple ecosystems overlapped and different species could interact comfortably. These weren't built structures, but carefully maintained natural spaces that functioned like outdoor living rooms for the entire animal kingdom. The Amazon Convergence Zone, for example, became a massive interspecies community where river dolphins provided underwater tours, sloths offered advanced courses in slow living philosophy, toucans ran color therapy sessions, and capybaras served as general life coaches and floating instructors. Architecture, Reflect's chief environmental designer Natura, was about enhancing what was already perfect rather than imposing our will on the landscape. Why build when you can simply arrange? Why construct when you can cultivate? Our cities were living ecosystems that grew rather than structures that imposed. The cultural exchange programs were unprecedented. Elephants taught memory workshops to forgetful species, while goldfish, whose memory reputation was clearly a human myth, ran courses in living in the present moment. Owls became the internet, an organized network of information sharing that spanned continents through carefully coordinated hooting patterns that could relay complex philosophical discussions across vast distances in real time. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of interspecies philosophy circles, regular gatherings where different species would share their unique perspectives on existence, consciousness, and the nature of happiness. A typical session might include an elephant discussing the importance of long-term memory, a mayfly sharing insights on making the most of limited time, and a tortoise offering perspectives on patience and persistence. We discovered, notes chief philosopher cross-species, that every species had evolved unique forms of wisdom. Humans, in their timeline, missed this because they assumed they were the only ones capable of deep thought. We learned that consciousness isn't about complexity, it's about awareness. And every creature, from the smallest beetle to the largest whale, had something profound to contribute to our understanding of existence. The conflict resolution system became so effective that the concept of war literally became extinct. Not because fighting was forbidden, but because no one could remember why they would want to fight when floating together was so much more pleasant. Territorial disputes were resolved through aesthetic negotiation. Competing groups would spend time together in the disputed area until they realized it was beautiful enough for everyone to share. Scarcity, explains resource management specialist Abundancia, turned out to be a mindset rather than a reality. When everyone focused on what they needed rather than what they wanted, and when sharing became more satisfying than hoarding, there was always enough for everyone. The planet provided everything we needed. We just had to stop interfering with its natural generosity. But even in paradise, questions arise. What about progress? What about achievement? What about those deep human drives for meaning and purpose that seem to require struggle and conquest? Now comes the part that will either blow your mind or make you want to throw your phone in frustration. Because the Capybara civilization's approach to progress and achievement was so radically different from ours that it challenges everything we've been taught about what makes life meaningful. See, we humans have this deep-seated belief that progress means more. More speed, more height, more complexity, more achievement. We measure success through accumulation. More money, more followers, more accomplishments, more stuff. But the capybaras stumbled upon a different equation entirely. Progress equals deeper satisfaction with what already exists. The great human mistake, observes chief existential philosopher Dr. Sufficient, was confusing motion with movement. They were always busy but rarely getting anywhere meaningful. They built faster cars to sit in longer traffic jams. They invented time-saving devices that somehow made them busier. They created social networks that made them feel more isolated. It was like watching someone run on a treadmill and thinking they were traveling the world. The capybara definition of achievement was revolutionary. Mastery meant becoming so skilled at something that you could do it effortlessly, which usually meant barely doing it at all. The greatest floaters weren't the ones who could swim fastest, but the ones who could become so perfectly aligned with the current that they appear to be floating without any effort whatsoever. True mastery, explains Grandmaster Float Supremo, looks like doing nothing because you've become so harmonized with natural forces that you don't need to impose your will anymore. The river does the work. The wind does the work. Gravity does the work. You just allow it. This philosophy extended to every aspect of their civilization. The most respected capybara architects were the ones who could enhance natural spaces with such subtlety that other animals couldn't tell what had been added. The greatest philosophers were those who could reduce complex ideas to such simple truths that everyone immediately understood them without needing to think hard about it. But here's where it gets really existentially challenging for our human brains. They found meaning through reduction rather than addition. While we pile on responsibilities, achievements, and possessions hoping to find purpose, they stripped away everything unnecessary until only the essential remained, and discovered that the essential was more than enough. Happiness, notes Professor Contentment, turned out to be the space between desires, not their fulfillment. The humans kept trying to fill that space with more desires, not realizing they were actually moving further away from what they were seeking. We learned to expand the space instead of filling it. The capybara work-life balance was solved in the most elegant way possible. They made everything they did feel like play. Even necessary tasks like maintaining river cleanliness or organizing group floats were approached with such a spirit of gentle cooperation that no one experienced them as work. Labor became a form of meditation. Productivity became a side effect of presence. And efficiency meant doing things so harmoniously that they seemed effortless. We never solved the work-life balance problem, admits economic minister Equilibrio, because we never created it in the first place. When everything you do contributes to collective well-being and personal peace, The distinction between work and life becomes meaningless. Every activity becomes life-enhancing rather than life-draining. But perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of their civilization was how they approached personal growth and self-improvement. While humans are obsessed with becoming better versions of themselves, capybaras focused on becoming more themselves. Instead of adding skills, achievements, and improvements, they spent time discovering and expressing their most authentic nature. Self-improvement, explains personal development guru Authenticity, assumed there was something wrong with who you already were. We discovered that the self doesn't need improvement. It needs expression. When you stop trying to be someone else's version of successful and start being your own version of authentic, life becomes effortless. Their educational system reflected this philosophy. Instead of cramming information into young capybaras, they created environments where natural curiosity could flourish. Learning happened through play, observation, and gentle experimentation rather than forced study and competitive achievement. Education, says Minister of Natural Learning Curiosa, wasn't about preparing students for some future life. It was about helping them engage more fully with the life they were already living. Why study the river when you can float in it? Why memorize facts about plants when you can eat them, rest under them, and learn their rhythms through direct experience? The result was a species that had achieved something humans spend billions of dollars trying to buy from therapists and self-help books. They were completely comfortable with who they were, exactly as they were, right where they were. Not because they had low standards or lacked ambition, but because they had discovered that contentment wasn't a destination. It was a way of traveling. Enough, concludes Chief Life Coach Satisfaction, wasn't about settling for less. It was about recognizing that what we already had was so abundant that wanting more became unnecessary. Not because more was bad, but because we were already full. You can't improve on perfect. You can only learn to recognize it. So what does this impossible utopia teach us about our own world? And more importantly, what happened when the capybaras finally encountered the one species that couldn't be converted to their philosophy of radical chill? And here's where our story takes its final, beautiful, heartbreaking turn. Because eventually, the capybaras of Earth, 2 discovered Earth, 1, us. The timeline where humans took the evolutionary wheel and drove straight into complexity, anxiety, and the desperate pursuit of more. When their interdimensional philosophers first observed our world, they were baffled. Here was a species that had achieved incredible technological advancement, but seemed fundamentally miserable. Beings who could fly faster than sound, but couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. Creatures who could communicate instantly across the globe, but felt more isolated than ever. It was like watching someone with a full refrigerator complain about being hungry, observed Dr. Parallel, the lead researcher in human studies. They had solved almost every material problem that had ever existed, yet somehow created new forms of suffering we couldn't even comprehend. But here's the twist that might just crack your reality a little bit. They didn't pity us. They were curious about us. Because in their perfectly chill world, they had never experienced the particular intensity of human experience. Our anxiety, our ambition, our beautiful and terrible capacity for dissatisfaction. It was all completely foreign to them. Perhaps, suggested Elder Possibility in the final chapter of the Capybara Chronicles, there are different ways of being alive in the universe. Perhaps some species are meant to float, and others are meant to swim upstream. Perhaps the cosmic joke isn't that one way is right and the other wrong, but that both ways are necessary to explore all the possibilities of existence. Maybe the real question isn't whether we should become more like capybaras, but whether we can become more like ourselves, with the same radical acceptance they brought to floating, but applied to the beautiful, chaotic, impossible human experience of never being quite satisfied with enough. What do you think? Are we swimming upstream towards something magnificent, or just exhausting ourselves fighting a current that was meant to carry us? Drop your thoughts below. And hey, if this story made you question everything for a few minutes, maybe share it with someone else who could use a good existential reset. Sometimes the best way to find our own path is to imagine what a completely different one might look like.